With congressional approval of the so-called Truman Doctrine in March of 1947, the U.S. embarked on, on policies not only of containment, which it had adopted in early 1946, but also a policy that was later used to justify U.S. involvement in military conflicts in Cuba, Vietnam, Korea, Nicaragua, and other countries in a military fashion. The Truman Doctrine became official American foreign policy, a policy of, again, of aiding free peoples who were attempting to resist foreign aggression and tyranny. The Truman Doctrine would be a cornerstone of U.S. Cold War policy for the duration of the Cold War, so from 1947 up until the early 1990s. It also became clear with approval of the Truman Doctrine that it would be the United States, not France or Great Britain or any other country, that would lead the so-called free countries of the world in their conflict with the Soviet Union and eventually Communist China over the next 45 years of the Cold War. The U.S. would become the leader of one side in the Cold War. What Winston Churchill dubbed the Soviet Union's Iron Curtain, he said he saw it descending over Eastern Europe and across the center of Europe, from Trieste to the Black Sea and to the Balkans, in a speech at Fulton, Missouri, at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. He'd been invited there by President Truman in March of 1946, clearly had been realized a couple of years later, following the Soviets' successful rigging of Hungary's elections in August of 1947 and the communist coup in Czechoslovakia in February and March of 1948. For a good visual representation of the Iron Curtain and the communist domination of Eastern Europe, go to the map in Grand Expectations on pages 118, 119 in the book. That's a good visual representation of the geography of communism in Eastern Europe that would last through the duration of the Cold War. Another pillar of Cold War policy, and just as important as the Truman Doctrine that was enshrined in 1947, was the Marshall Plan. And that plan committed the U.S. to the aid of countries that were struggling economically, and the idea being that propping them up would help them economically, would better help them resist communism. At Harvard's commencement in June of 1947, Secretary of State George Marshall, one of the most highly respected Americans of the day, introduced ideas for what would become known as the Marshall Plan. This was a plan for massive, truly massive American aid to the still reeling, war-torn countries of Europe. The idea was to get Europe and Russia back on their feet again, which would, of course, both be good for those countries and for the United States, which then could begin to sell its products to those countries again. Although the Soviets initially expressed interest in participating, Stalin eventually became suspicious and prevented the Soviets and their Eastern European satellite countries from participating in the Marshall Plan. A massive foreign aid program, the Marshall Plan eventually funneled $13.34 billion, which would be a lot now, but was a truly amazing sum of money in the late 40s and early 50s. Funneled that amount in aid to Western Europe between 1948 and 1952. This program did much to restart the economies of Western European countries such as France, West Germany, and Belgium, and helped them very, very rapidly recover. Between them, the policies of containment, the Truman Doctrine, and the Marshall Plan represented a major commitment by the United States to involvement in foreign affairs and world affairs, and to the support of free peoples against the threat of Soviet communism. Given the United States' long-standing hesitancy regarding involvement in foreign affairs, this represented a major departure for the U.S. from its long-standing foreign policies. The principles articulated in 1947 and the philosophies articulated by the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and containment would guide American foreign policy for the next 45 years. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. would also join NATO, a military alliance of the United States and Western European countries, which exists to this day, and broke with the United States' long-standing reluctance to be involved with entangling alliances. And in 1949, the U.S. embarked on the Berlin airlift, which involved bringing lots of supplies to West Berlin after the government of East Germany blockaded West Berlin in order to try to starve it out and make it go communist. NATO and the Berlin airlift also flowed from these policies that had been articulated in 1946 and 47. Thanks. That's the lecture for today.